On his retirement as Chief Justice of the Philippines, all 14 incumbent associate justices unanimously presented him a unique plaque of acclamation, declaring him the Renaissance jurist of the 21st century. After retirement, he was invited to sit as a director or advisor and/or officer of 15 publicly listed corporations, several other large non-publicly listed companies, as well as numerous local and foreign foundations, associations, and religious groups. He continues to be relevant in the public space by writing and discussing opinions carried by media. Joining us now for Thought Leaders to speak about liberty and prosperity, as well as on his life and legacy, retired Chief Justice Artemio V. Panganiban. Chief Justice Art, it's so good to see you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Very happy and honored to be here with you, Cathy.
I want to thank you for being here, Chief Justice, because I know that Lenny had just passed on 2 weeks ago. And when I learned about that, I thought you might have wanted some time away. But you're here, and I'd like to thank you for being here.
Thank you. I made a commitment to you, and I always fulfill my commitments.
So how are you holding up?
Trying to cope with loss, longings, and loneliness. But I hope to be able to overcome.
And where would you drive that strength to overcome what you're going through right now? With the kind of eulogy that you had written, and it was really a beautiful eulogy, where you actually anchored it all in the Christian faith that Lenny had nurtured in you. And come to think of it, you've celebrated your 62nd wedding anniversary on the day that she passed.
Well, she is my spiritual anchor. She's quiet, she's reserved, she's private. I'm open, I'm transparent, I like to socialize, but not when I was in the Supreme Court, of course. We have different upbringing, we have different beginnings, but we have surpassed all that because we have dedicated ourselves to the Lord. And it is our offering to the Lord, whatever we wear, we are, whatever we will be, we dedicate to Him. Because we know, two of us and our children, that this is not the life. The life is the life after this life. With that consolation, I try to adjust. I try to pray. And I thank people like you who commiserate with us, to console us, who gives us words of comfort. It's very important for people like us who have had terrible losses to have words of comfort, to buoy us up when we're down and to help us overcome.
It's amazing that you speak the words you have, considering that you have described yourself as pretty pedestrian when it comes to the Catholic faith.
Yes. I was a Catholic ignoramus because I've had no catechetical background. I studied in the public schools, elementary school, high school, even college. I was FEU, which is a non-sectarian school. There's a little incident about that. As a high school honor student at Mapa High School, I was granted a scholarship by UP. And I wanted to study in UP because my classmates were going to UP. So, in fact, even before we graduated, we would go to the campus in Diliman and we would swear among ourselves before the oblation that we would be in the University of the Philippines. But I couldn't enroll there even if I was granted a full scholarship because my father couldn't afford the 15 centavo ride then at that time from Sampaloc, Catalunya Street in Sampaloc, up to Diliman. And so my father said, why don't you just enroll nearby? We were in Catalunya. You choose between UST and FEU. We were in the middle. So I went to UST and I was interviewed by a Dominican priest. he said, "Oh, you're an honor student. You want a scholarship here?" "Yes, Father." "Well, let's see," he says, how you understand our faith. "If you can answer 3 questions, I'm going to grant you a scholarship." First question was, "How many gods are there?" I knew. 1. Very good. "How many persons in one God?" Well, 3. Came the critical question. "Name them." Well, I didn't know. So I failed the test.
Oh, you
So
did?
I was not enrolled at UST. So I went to FEU, and I was granted the scholarship without being asked any question. Without any question. So I owe FEU that. But I was still a pedestrian, of course.
But it was a priest in FEU that had actually taught you the religion.
Well, yes, he was my first contact really with religion. Father Michael Nolan, he was the chaplain of FEU. He built the FEU chapel. Although FEU is a non-sectarian university, the administration during my time as a student allowed Father Nolan, Michael Nolan was his name. He was a Columban priest. Columban priests are from Ireland, Irish priests, blue eyes, nice, handsome priests. Built the chapel, and he eyed me because I was a student leader. I was, at that time, student politics in FEU was really at a rise because we had to campaign from room to room to be elected. I became, of course, president of the Central Student Government when I was sophomore. But Father Nolan eyed me, and when I was still freshman, I was already elected to the central government. He talked with me. He said, "You're a good man. I checked you. Why don't you join me in rebuilding the chapel?" So, building this chapel. So, I said, maybe there's nothing wrong with that. I contributed very little, but gradually, we were able to, gain each other's confidence. And then he told me, "I'll teach you 4 prayers. The first is the Our Father, second is Hail Mary, third is Glory Be, and the fourth was the FEU prayer. There is a non-denominational prayer of FEU." So he taught me all that. So we became good friends, and the Student Catholic Action, which he formed in FEU, also engaged in local politics, and they supported me. So that was a big thing because as a poor student, I nearly became a communist. Yes, because I liked at that time the motto. The motto of the communist, Karl Marx, is to whom according to his need and from whom according to his ability. Meaning, a person gets paid according only to what he needs, not more. But he must work according to his ability to contribute to society. But he cannot be paid according to his ability. Otherwise, he'll have excess because there will be no economic equality. So it was very inviting for me that, that there will be equality in economic situation. But Father Nolan veered me out of that. And helped me, in fact, form the National Union of Students of the Philippines. We got the Catholic schools to join the National Union of Students. At that time, maybe you don't know, you were not yet born. The Catholic schools, particularly the women's and girls' schools, were called the cloistered schools because the students, the colegialas we called them at that time, were not allowed to go out. They were confined in the walls of the schools, St. Scholastica, St. Teresa, St. Paul's. They did not participate. So Father Nolan and I were talking, we should get them out to support our program I became anti-communist, partly because of him, but partly because later on I realized that the ideal of Karl Marx cannot happen, as it did not happen in China, it did not happen in Russia. There were still unfavorable economic compartmentalization. Anyway, so my outlook as a Catholic was begun in FEU, of all places, because it's a non-Catholic school.
And that prepared you to meet Lenny.
Lenny, yes.
Because you knew a little bit about religion, and she herself was a very religious person.
Yes.
But what was a meeting like? And how did you get on? She was pretty active as well in her own school.
Well, in her own school, she was active, and she was editor of their student organ, the Scholastica. And they were all cloistered before. But because of the effort of Father Nolan, who organized the Student Catholic Action, first he would go to a Catholic school, let's organize the Student Catholic Action. And then he would invite the students to be more active socially outside their little cubicles, as it were, outside their schools. And this is one occasion when Lenny joined as a representative of St. Scholastica in a seminar on communism that the National Union of Students, of which I was president, was holding or going to hold in Naga City. And at that time, believe it or not, the train from Tutuban Station in Manila reached all the way to Legazpi. And of course, before reaching Legazpi, you have Naga. But it took 12 hours from Tutuban Station in Manila to Naga. And I was seated beside her. Some people say, oh, you seated yourself.
Is that fate or luck?
Both, I think, because as the president, I did not reserve any seat for myself. I was moving around, trying to comfort delegates, particularly delegates from the Catholic schools, because this would be the first time they'll be out of their cloisters, out of the walls of their schools. And so there was a vacant seat beside her. So I said, may I sit beside you? Oh, yes, he said. Then we came to talking, So one thing led to another.
It's a beautiful journey for you to recall in how you met each other.
Yes.
And how that union lasted for 62 years.
Well, we have had our difficulties, our problems, that we tried to overcome.
And also overcome together, because key to that partnership really was that you sought her opinions in the most difficult of circumstances. For instance, the late Philippine President Fidel Ramos had invited you to become part of the cabinet, to become the Secretary of Justice.
Oh, you know that, okay.
Of course. And you also consulted two other Catholic priests as to what they thought.
Yes.
And Lenny would have broken that deadlock.
Yes.
What kind of wisdom did she impart in those moments that you were so unsure whether to go into politics?
Well, first, I didn't expect President Ramos to invite me to join his cabinet, because I didn't campaign for him. In fact, when he called me before he assumed office, it was early June. The president assumes office every June 30. It was beginning of June. After his victory has been ascertained, he called me one-on-one for 1 hour. He was discussing what people expected of his presidency, of the new president. So I was talking with him. And then finally he said, Art, I invited you here to offer you to join my cabinet as Secretary of Justice. I was taken aback. I said, Mr. President, thank you very much, but I do not deserve that. Oh, why? He said, because I didn't campaign for you. I think your cabinet should be composed of people who campaigned for you and believed your platform. I know you didn't campaign for me. You didn't even vote for me, he said. So we voted for your mentor, Jovi Salonga, he said. Who was he? One of his opponents. He defeated, no? So I was surprised why he invited me. But anyway, he said, you know, I don't want to be president only of the people who voted for me. I want to be president of all the people of the entire nation, he says. So one way of doing that is to invite you to join my cabinet. First, because precisely you were on the other side with Jovi. And secondly, he says, because you're a Catholic and you're a Catholic lay leader. I said, okay, Mr. President, let me consult my spiritual advisors and my wife. So I consulted Bishop Makani and Archbishop Leonardo Legaspi. He's now deceased. He was then president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. And they had opposing views. Bishop Makani said, why? You should join. He's a Protestant president inviting you as a Catholic lay leader. Nice of him. If you refuse, he will say, well, I gave opportunity for the Catholics to join my cabinet. They refused. So they cannot blame me if one day I will not be giving voice to the Catholics. That was Bishop Akani. And then the Archbishop Legaspi is more conservative. And he said, no, you should not join because you'll be thought of as taking advantage of, you're being Catholic. You will be accused of taking advantage. So I said, I'll have to talk with my wife. So I told Mela, you know what she said? Well, from the very beginning, I told you already when we got married, you can be anything except a politician because I cannot be a politician's wife. I cannot discharge that role effectively. So I went back to President Ramos. I told him, I'm sorry, sir. My wife objects and I have to follow her. So he said, oh, Alder Bisaya ka pala. And then he said, Mark, pareho na tayo. Dalawa na tayo. So he was a nice guy, President Ramos.
Even nicer that he actually humbly offered you the job of being part of the judiciary.
Well, after that, he did.
That moment.
He says, but you must serve our country. Why don't you join the Supreme Court? Oh, I jumped. I said, oh, Mr. President, my wife and I will love that because that's non-partisan. It's a non-partisan job. It's not political. Because by the way, my wife is saying, now you're Secretary of Justice. The next time you'll be a senator. I don't know what else. He said, I cannot be a politician, so I cannot help you.
So right there and then, you accepted the job. You didn't consult Lenny.
Supreme Court, yes.
Yes, as Supreme Court.
Because I was sure that
Chief.
she would agree.
Right.
And I was right. She said, oh, very good. That is how I got into the Supreme Court.
And you mentioned Jovi Salonga as a
Yes.
mentor. And there's
Yes.
even a more powerful description you give of him as a surrogate father.
Yes.
And you did write a very powerful eulogy of him, mentioning him teaching you that law cannot be separate from life, that it should be used as a brick in building the social edifice and as a means to fulfill the deepest aspirations of man.
Oh my God, you know all about me.
But what sort of legacy
I will have to write in my will that when I die, you should deliver the eulogy for me.
But it's really a beautiful eulogy you wrote.
Yes.
The legacy that he's left
Yes.
behind. I mean, that really impacted probably your legal philosophy
Yes.
and the way you decided in the
Yes.
judiciary.
Well, Salonga was a product of UP, of Harvard. His Master of Laws was in Harvard, and Yale, his doctorates in law. He's one of the few who were successful in combining both Harvard and Yale because they were the opposing schools in the United States at that time, and I understand even during this time. No? And as a student, he knew I was a student leader, but he would tell me, Artemio, you might be the best student leader of this country. You became president of our central student government when you were a sophomore, the youngest ever. But here in my classroom, you're just a student. Your first duty is to be a good student. So he would call me for recitations at the height of student activities. So I had to prepare. I had to prepare for him. Anyway, I liked him so much that after I graduated, I asked him, sir, which of the two universities, graduate university, is better, Harvard or Yale? And can you recommend me for a scholarship? Don't have money. So he did. He recommended me. He said, Harvard, if you want to be trained as a trial lawyer, protecting your private clients. But Yale, he said, is more for building society. It's more for building the nation rather than serving clients. So it's not service to clients, but it's service to country. So he says, since you are, you have this leadership potential, I think you should be in Yale. So he recommended me for a scholarship in Yale. And true enough, I got a scholarship in Yale, including board and lodging and writing. But I was not given a visa by the United States Embassy. They didn't tell me why, but I suspect it's because of my activist. As a student, I was an activist, and they were probably afraid that I might bring my activism there. Might have been marked. But anyway, he told me, oh, never mind. I will teach you what I learned in UP, Harvard, and Yale. Just stay in my law firm. So that was how I got into law practice. But Salonga is not just a lawyer. He is a human being. He is first a person, as I said, who belongs to society more than the profession or more than law. In fact, the biggest or most unforgettable teaching he has told me, and to which to this day I remember, is this. It is all right to buy the things, to have the things that money can buy, like food on the table, clothes at your back, a little house for your family, even a car. But, he says, it's more important to have the things that money cannot buy, like integrity, like honor, like service to country, like belief in a power bigger than all of us. I've never forgotten that up to this day. And because of that, I have taken him as my surrogate father, to go to your specific question, because my father died and I was still freshman in the preparatory law in FEU. That's again the story, because I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a chemical engineer. When in the graduation in Mapa High School, we had an annual, we called, where all the graduating students, we were 1,200 graduating students, fourth year. They indicated what your name is, your date of birth, many other things than your ambition, career ambition. That's to be a chemical engineer. So I showed it to him proudly. Oh, says he frowned. No, you're my youngest. I want you to be a lawyer. Because that was my ambition, to be a lawyer. And he says, I couldn't be a lawyer because I'm the oldest among the 8 siblings. I had to support my brothers and sisters and 4 of my children. So he could not have that ambition. But now he says, you've got to be a lawyer. No, I said, I want to be a chemical engineer. Argument. Then he would tell me, you see, you're meant to be a lawyer, you can argue with me. So, by arguing with him, defeated me. So, anyway, we agreed on a compromise. Okay, you enroll for 2 years in preparatory law, but after 2 years, let's review. If you still want to be a chemical engineer, then I concede you be a chemical engineer.
And you wanted to proceed with law.
If you want to proceed with law,
What
as
made
I
you
want,
decide? What made you decide to proceed?
yes, as I want, he said, then you please become a lawyer so that you can fulfill my personal ambition. I became a lawyer because on the first year, pre-law, he died. He died in my arms. I brought him to the hospital. I was feeling his pulse from the pulse here, to the arms, the neck, to the what do you call this? Naple? Yeah. I felt his pulse. Brought him to the UST hospital, to the charity emergency because we didn't have money. He died. And I told myself, well, my father's wish is for me to be a lawyer. So I became a lawyer.
And you've met in Jovi Salonga, your surrogate father, whom you
Yes.
have asked if it would be all right
Yeah.
that you would pen and be the very first
Yes.
former Chief Justice to be penning a newspaper column.
Well, after I graduated, Marixi Prieto, who was my client before I joined the Supreme Court, came to the house. She said, may I invite you to be to please write a column 3 times a week in the Inquirer. I said, let me think about it. And so I consulted him. He says, no, you should not. I do not know of any Chief Justice who has ever written a column. You don't write history. You make it. That's what he said. And you made it. So he says, desist. Tell Marixi, thank you very much, but you'd rather make history rather than write it. So I talked to Marixi. Marixi, I said, you know, Senator Salonga says, I should not write history, I should make it. And there's never been a Chief Justice who has written a column. Marixi said, well, I do not know of any Chief Justice who has been invited to write a column. She was fast also. She was fast, Marixi. So anyway, we agreed on a compromise. I would write once a week. And since then, I've written every week for 16 years without fail.
And it's amazing because 16 years actually exceeds the number of years that you've done in the judiciary.
Yes, 11
of
years.
11 years, 10
Yes.
years in justice,
Yes.
as a justice,
Yes.
and as the Supreme Court Chief Justice
Yes.
for 1 year.
Yes, in fact, I told Marixi that, you know, that I've been writing a column in the Inquirer more than I wrote for the Supreme Court.
What does that tell you? That knowledge of knowing that something you actually didn't know that you could do, write columns.
I've never
something that
written.
you-
I've never written in my college days because I wanted to be an engineer, so writing was not in my mind. But slowly I learned it. I learned the art of writing simply.
But just looking back as you were making history, as you mentioned earlier, that we write history, we make history. What were the 3 game-changing decisions at the Supreme Court, would you say, that you came across, for better or for worse, for the Constitution, for the nation, for policies, during your term from 1995, the time that you entered Judiciary,
Yeah.
and from the time that you became Chief Justice?
Well, first, during my term as Chief Justice, I was appointed by Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. Again, I did not seek the position. She just appointed me. I was surprised because I did not apply for the position. She just appointed me. In fact, when she was swearing me to office, I said, Madam President, you appointed me without my asking. Do you expect anything from me? She said, no, just be where you are. She didn't ask me for anything. To her great credit, she didn't ask me for anything. And she respected my being Chief Justice. So with Ramos. Ramos was a gentleman. He never asked me any favor, directly or indirectly. Even President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. Now, I say that as an introduction because the four major decisions of my term as Chief Justice were against her government. First, the so-called the Supreme Court barred the Senate from barred the cabinet members were barred by the president from testifying in Senate inquiries. We reversed that. We said no, they should testify. It's a long story, but that's the short part. Second decision was that was penned by Justice Morales, Chief Morales. And then the second decision is by Ascuna. It was to stop the so-called preemptive the policy of the president on preemptive stopping of rallies. We said, no, that's unconstitutional. Rallies must be allowed as free expression of the people's will. And the third one is we invalidated an emergency order of the president, Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. We said that that's against the Constitution. But the final one was, well, this third one was written by Justice Helen Gutierrez. The fourth one, which is the most critical to the president, was we stopped the revision of the Constitution through the so-called People's Initiative, which would have, if we allowed it, it would have given the opportunity for President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo to continue her term, because presidents are not allowed re-election. But if the Constitution were changed to allow the parliamentary system, then she could be Prime Minister for life, as long as she could, of course, control majority of Parliament, which is easy. As you know, the House of Representatives is always controlled by the incumbent president. Anyway, that was the most difficult decision that we have made, because it was very close, 8-7. 8 justices to 7. And as Chief Justice, you know, I always talk privately with the justices. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? I get a consensus. The first 3 decisions were fine, easy. First 2 were unanimous. The next one was, 15-3. But this one was very difficult. This one was very difficult. I do not know if the president called for loyalty from her appointments, but it was difficult. The moods of the justices were swinging back and forth. And the night before, we were going to conduct a vote. I said we would win by 1 vote. This case was assigned to Tony Carpio. So we were talking, Tony Carpio and I were talking. Oh, we will win by 1 vote, 8-7. And then on the morning when we were going to vote, one of the justices who was going to vote with us, I won't mention his name, said, I'm sorry, Chief, I will have to vote with the other side. Says, because the person who got me to this court, who recommended me to this court, asked me this favor. I cannot turn him or her, I would not say whether it's a him or her, down. I was shocked. So I told Tony Carpio, Tony, prepare to lose because you write a dissenting opinion. During my time, we released immediately the decisions once after the voting because I required the justices to write both a majority opinion and a dissenting opinion, depending on the vote. So much so that if the decision is for this side, all those who voted will just sign the majority decision by one of those who wrote a majority decision, and the others will just stick to their dissenting opinions or join the dissenting opinion. That was how I dealt with the court at that time. So immediately upon the voting, we just signed in the table and we released the decision. Anyway, on that morning, we were prepared to lose already. And I said, if this is the case, I cannot lead this court, I'm going to retire. Early retire. Tony Carpio also said, I'll also retire. No, I said, don't retire because you have a long term. Anyway, you know, the voting in the court is one by one, especially on critical issues. So the voting would be called from the most junior to the most senior. Yes, you can explain your vote, etc. And then came to the three most senior. One of the three most senior, whom I expected to vote with the other side. By the way, the other side was led by Ray Puno. He's a very good justice. No? He wanted he sided with the president's people. No? Reversed. He was crying. He said, I'm sorry, but I will change my mind. He said, Ray, we're very close friends, but I've been thinking about this all night. And I'm sorry, I'm going to reverse my vote. Suddenly, Tony Carpio and I looked at each other. Wow, we're going to win. And we won. So that's the most difficult decision ever that I had to face.
It sounded really difficult. And somewhere down the line, I mean, we talked about politics before, and you said that you didn't want to go into politics, but wasn't that just a manifestation that there is a lot of politics that happens within the judiciary?
It's not really politics. It's justice is granted a lot of leeway to vote and change your mind even at the last minute, because we are given the presumption that we have studied the matter thoroughly and we can change our minds depending on our study. Although, for me, I've never changed my mind. Once I cast my vote, that's it. For the 11 years I was in the court. No,
no in-betweens?
No, it's either yes or no. I voted either with majority or with the minority. But I had a few decisions myself that are that are interesting. For instance, in one case, I wrote a decision on how to write a decision because since I was a student and even as a practicing lawyer, I found decisions of the Supreme Court difficult to decipher. So I outlined how decisions should be made. You have a prefatory statement, and then the facts of the case, then the issues to be resolved, and then how each issue should be decided, and then the final conclusion. Conclusion is who wins, the plaintiff or the defendant. No, I think the case is social justice versus Mike Velarde, the famous televangelist. No, that's one decision that's, I think, important because it will influence a lot of justices to write very simply. Because in my opinion, decisions should be understood not just by the lawyers, but by their clients, by the parties who stand to lose the most
but
or to win the most.
But doesn't that take away the mystery, if you will, that most in the judiciary would prefer to have, a veil of mystery.
Yes, well, that is I think, the olden times. But times change. We are more transparent now. There's more accountability now. And that the judiciary must also veer towards that. And it has veered towards that over the years. And even the current court, I must say, led by Chief Justice Esmundo, they have a reform program that also veers towards transparency and digitization. The courts will be digitized. Chief Justice Esmundo is a computer freak, so he likes the computers and, of course, digitization.
Well, now that we're talking about the current judiciary and the current challenges and the on and off conversations on charter change, what are your thoughts about charter change? Are you for or against it?
Well, I am in principle in favor of changing parts of the Constitution. But there is a right time to do the right thing and for the right reasons by the right parties. So, right now, there are too many things going on in this country. Prices are high, people are not gainfully employed, Putting in charter change, it's not time yet. It's not time. Even the president said it's not time. So it's not time for charter change. But there are parts of the Constitution that must eventually be changed. For instance, this is not debated publicly. The definition of the national territory of the Philippines. The definition is a little bit vague because it does not include the West Philippine Sea expressly. In fact, well, the Chinese may be arguing, you're claiming that you have sovereign rights over the West Philippine Sea. Look at your constitution, it's not there. That's true, it's not there. So we need to amend that part, for instance. There are other parts that I think needs to be changed, but not now, not by the present people. As I said, there is a right time to do the right thing by the right people and for the right reasons.
Let's talk about those right reasons in the private sector, because you now lead a very active engagement with the private sector, with at least 15 publicly listed corporations.
Yes.
And you're pretty active when you attend these board meetings over Zoom. Throughout the pandemic, I mean, how did that go for you, doing all these virtual meetings and still being as engaged?
Let me say that I enjoy them. In fact, once in a while, I would tell Manny Pangilinan or Jaime Augusto Sobel de Ayala, I said, I thank you very much because you invite me to sit in your board of directors and I learn a lot. You teach me a lot and you pay me. Isn't that interesting? I said, I would laugh, of course.
But the same could be said for you because you come to these meetings well prepared. You just don't talk about the financial statements being presented, but bring in an anecdote or two. Maybe a hospital visit with a chance upon a digital payment facility. And then you provide some color. But where does that sort of angling of your actionable insights come from?
Well, I've never lost my sense of curiosity. And I think that sense of curiosity must pervade every person so that you never really grow old. For instance, I was invited by Ramon Ang to sit in the board of Petron. And the first thing I asked him was, may I visit the refining plant in Bataan? Oh, he said, you're the first director to ask a favor like that. How do you go there? I said, I use my own car. No, he said, use my helicopter. So I went there by myself, but I was met by the general manager of the plant, and I looked at the plant, the refining plant. I was interested. I toured the plant. And I wanted to know the engineering differences and how to produce diesel, how to produce gasoline. I was naturally curious, in other words, because I want to learn. I cannot take responsibility without knowing the background. So it gives me great pleasure to be able to sit in these boards. No? Sometimes there is a conflict though, and I decline some of them.
And it also gives you a great purview of the whole business sector and the whole private sector and how they're preparing for the next generation in preparing that culture of excellence for the young ones.
That's right. Culture of excellence.
How would you gauge the level at which our private corporations, publicly listed, most of them, are doing a good job at providing that culture of excellence for the young?
Oh, yes. Our publicly listed companies are well supervised both by the Securities and Exchange Commission and by the Philippine Stock Exchange. In the beginning, I had to study what were the rules, what were the regulations, and whether they're adequate to protect the public interest. Because I am mostly independent director. My invitation is to be independent director, and I like it because an independent director does not owe the stockholders, any group of stockholders, any favor. My loyalty is to the law and to the government that passed the law that will assure good governance, transparency, and accountability. And I always do that job, and I tell the owners, the majority owners of the corporations, that I cannot be expected to back them up all the time. Of course, my loyalty is to the corporation, not to individuals, not to groups, but to the corporation as a separate entity. If their interests with the corporation, then they can expect me to back them up. But so far, I'm happy that this expectation that I have is fulfilled. I do not join companies where I believe I cannot work with the owners. I have respectfully declined some offers because I believe that I cannot serve the corporation well. Either the owners don't allow differences in opinion, or they're not transparent enough, or they expect me to do something like lobbying for cases. I never lobby for cases, not for any companies I'm with. And I make sure I say that. Please don't expect me to lobby for you in the courts, particularly in the Supreme Court, because I will not. My colleagues, my incumbent colleagues will hate me if I ever did that.
Finally, CJ, what are you most grateful for?
Well, I'm most grateful for the support that I get from my family, from my wife who has passed. Because whether I am great or not so great, or in fact a failure, they're there for me. And mostly, of course, to my Lord and Master, to my divine Maker, in the sunset of my life, I lay everything before Him. I am nothing. You're everything. Please take me with you in paradise.
I thank you so much. I have so much gratefulness for your presence here. CJ, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I learned a lot also from you. Imagine.
You, as I did.
Now I know. Now I know you know me.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, CJ.
Thank you very much, Cathy.
And catch us again next Tuesday at 9:30 p.m. Manila time on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I'm Cathy Yang, and this is Thought Leaders.